My name is Cristina. I'm the CEO and co-founder here at Pandium. And today we are here to discuss overcoming and avoiding integration scaling pains. It's one of my favorite topics because that means that your integrations are working if people are using them. To get started, why don't we do a round of intros, who you are, where you work, what you do, and maybe where you are in the world. Trevor.
Perfect. Good to be here. Good to meet everyone virtually. So Trevor, I'm based in Hoboken, New Jersey. Similarly to some of the folks at the Pandium team, it's let's just say New York's kind of been in a bit of a fog given the Yankees over the past couple of days here. So hopefully they can turn it around and everyone will the mood will be lifted a bit. But I've been at Workable now for almost 3 years, really focused on kind of all things tech partnerships and integrations here at Workable. I always tell people if it kind of looks, smells, or sounds like an integration, it's going to come across my desk. But more practically speaking, kind of what that means is kind of identifying, taking a look at who should we integrate with, what makes sense for an integration, whether or not it's Workable built, partner built, any combination of the two. Workable itself, just a very high level overview. Full service HR platform, helping folks do anything from applicant tracking and recruiting all the way to kind of a core system of record serving as that HRIS or bedrock for your foundation. And my role, because of those two key areas of mine, it can be product focused, it can be commercial focused, and a bit of blending of the both. So I have a bit of a unique perspective, just given my day job there.
Thank you. Venkat, how about you?
Hi, everyone. My name is Venkat Iyer. I'm VP of products here at Talkdesk, focusing on our platform and integrations area. I have spent a bit of my career building enterprise software for Fortune 500 companies. It's been a bit of challenging and rewarding. My hope is able to kind of share some of those things and at the same time learn from you all as well.
Awesome. And Shon, you want to go?
Hi, yeah. I'm Shon Urbas. I'm CTO and co-founder of Pandium. Pandium helps our customers build integration ecosystems, observability, installation, running, all the things that go into running and scaling integrations. I'm currently based out of Asheville, but a lifelong Mets fan, and so I'm not too sad about the Yankees. Dodgers are really, really good this year.
That's enough of that. We could spend the whole webinar. Just kidding, Shon. Thank you, guys. And yeah, there's not that many folks, I think, out there that have really worked on ecosystems that hit that kind of inflection point of scale. So it's really exciting to have you guys here. And let's go ahead and get started. So I think we could actually have an entire webinar around what's the definition of scale. For this conversation, I think everyone will know it within their own organization. So what are some of the most common challenges and mistakes that you've seen when you're scaling, building integrations?
Do you
Go for it,
want
Venkat.
me to get started? Okay.
Yeah, do it. Hit it.
There are few areas, that are common integration mistakes, right? One of the most common challenges is underestimating the complexity of integrations as they scale. Okay. Often the initial builds just need to connect few systems, and then as more and more application and integration points kind of let the architecture can become tangled and fragile. Another frequent mistake is not prioritizing data consistency and governance. When multiple systems are involved, maintaining accurate, synchronized data is an important piece. Security can also be, is also an important critical factor. People generally feel like once the integration is secure, it is all set. But when new data flows and the new connections kind of introduce, the new vulnerabilities can show up. So having that security review is important. End-to-end visibility. I think I heard Shan kind of talk about the monitoring, observability, and other aspects. Right? It's super important. When you have an issue in production, ability to identify those bottlenecks, troubleshoot them real quickly is going to be a struggle. So my advice, flexibility, governance and security, and invest in monitoring tools.
Yeah, Trevor, what do you think?
Yeah, one, I would say, fairly common mistake I see, and this is true too across like the HR tech ecosystem, is that people will take kind of a one size fits all approach, which you certainly cannot. To Venkat's point, like if you're building, say, an integration into one of the biggest payroll companies, there is a very, very high likelihood that's going to be a different experience than building it to a startup assessment tool. And taking this kind of, oh, this is our roadmap, these are the integrations we're going to build. This is what we expect to get accomplished this quarter. But having kind of a hodgepodge of different sizes, maybe undershooting expectations of how long you think something's going to take, you got to always bake in those different contingency plans and what could pop up. So really just going in eyes wide open and saying, okay, this is going to be a beast of an integration. Let's treat it as such, respect the amount of time that it's going to take, and then maybe ones that are less of a priority. And I'll probably talk quite a bit about prioritization today, like putting those on the back burner, knowing, hey, we've got some extra resources, have extra capacity. Maybe that's when we'll slot in something like that.
Shon, anything to add?
Yeah, I'll just double down and say, I think not thinking about the infrastructure and the tooling around the integrations, they're sometimes thought of as like an afterthought, but in reality, it's your customer's primary way of like interfacing with your systems. It's like they're passing their data to you. And I think not thinking about, well, okay, happy path, everything's going to work great. What happens when it doesn't work great? How are we going to discover that? How are we going to rectify that? Thinking about those things, I think is really, really important.
Christina, we can't hear.
Sorry about that, guys. I'll echo what Shon said, that monitoring is a big thing that folks often don't think about. And if you have one customer using one integration, like monitoring is not that important. But I think we all hope that you're going to get hundreds or thousands of them. And at that point, the only thing I think is worse than not having an integration is having it being broken and not either silently failing, or your customers end up calling you and let you know that it's not working. That is never a good day. And that parlays well into the next question. What do you think are the similarities and differences between scaling integrations versus scaling other parts of your product, or I guess what we would consider to be like feature development?
I can kick that one off.
Yeah.
I would say, like, for me, as I think about it, one of the, if not the biggest difference is just that end user experience. Like if you're building something for your solution, it's going to be a feature enhancement, a new product that you're releasing. You're thinking about, okay, how is this user interacting within our ecosystem? Integrations are that. Plus the other third-party tool is how is this user going to use our solution, but also in the context of theirs, what does the partner's UI look like? What does that user journey and experience look like? You could design what you think to be the easiest sort of integration that's out there, but if the partner's UI is very clunky, or the place that it sits within the partner's application isn't very intuitive or doesn't make sense, it's not really going to do you any good in terms of integration, adoption, and usage. So I think it's something that people need to really think about when going through and designing these integrations.
Yeah, Venkat, what about you?
So similarities, I think, like Trevor mentioned, is generally very common when I think about from an architecture point of view, performance, scalability, reliability testing point of view, adaptability, right? Like any other product feature, integrations must be designed with future growth in mind. Considering scalability cannot be afterthought. However, integrations do come with unique challenges due to that dependency on external systems. Each of these external systems has their own complexity, their own life cycle stages, and potential constraints, right? Dependency management is going to be one of the key difference as I see it, because we are kind of building bridges to multiple different systems. Data synchronization is another key, because usually data flow from multiple different systems in an integration versus in a singular system, in a regular application development. It's contained within that same system. The last one is the security, because the new data flows and connections, they can potentially introduce new vulnerabilities to the systems. So yeah, I think there are a lot of similarities, but then there are additional challenges for integrations as the demands increase.
Yeah, Shon, anything to add? I feel like you have thoughts here.
It's interesting because I'm coming from the build side, where we're, as an engineer, like, how do we manage and build and keep these all going? And in some ways, at least the maintaining part is a little bit easier, only because it's a very regular process that sort of like, if you know how it's going to work for 10 records, and then you see how it works for 100 records, you can have a good idea of what it'll do at 1,000 records or 10,000. You never know. I mean, I definitely had that blow up in my face, some of those assumptions, but it's interesting with, at least between two different systems, or like where the integration is very discrete, the ability to horizontally scale is kind of interesting there. That said, you have to design and build the integration in the right ways. We talk about the complexity and dependency management. There's just basic, like, hey, if the internet's down one day, what are you going to do in that case? Do you have to reset the entire integration? Or do you have to, maybe there's some type of caching you're doing? There's like things you can decide when building the integration that help make it resilient in a way that doesn't feel the same in product.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And also the dependencies, Venkat, that you were kind of referencing. When you're building a product, oftentimes there's dependencies on, the tooling that you're using to build that product, but those are largely consistent versus when you're dealing with external systems where you may have those systems changing over time or dealing with stability with those systems. And to Shon's point, I think there's a lot of failure patterns that can be difficult to predict in advance unless you've done this a lot. Like, hey, what happens if, like to Shon's point, a partner system was down and they send you all the webhooks from that day in 1 minute? Like, what are you going to do about that? And we all hope that stuff doesn't happen. But I've certainly worked around companies where that would be like a production issue if that happens. So, I think it's a unique challenge because your front end framework is probably not going to do that to you. And Venkat, I see you nodding your head. I hope that you've not been on the receiving end of those webhooks, but
we all have carry our scars, so
yes, we sure do. I've been doing integration work for 20 years, and I feel like there's a lot of patterns across industries, but there's also those failure patterns are definitely different than product. And that actually leads into another question about like the strategic approach. So when you're thinking about the integration strategy, maybe from the very beginning, how would you recommend that companies ensure that their infrastructure and everything is flexible enough to handle growth over time? Like, what would you say to think about in advance for companies that are hoping that they're going to get really high adoption of these apps?
I mean, I'll double down on flexibility. Nothing's gospel. Like, you need to be flexible and nimble enough to kind of see what people are building. So for us, with our ecosystem, we have people building to Workable, either through our open API, through our partner program, or we'll build to partners. For the situations where like people are building to us, we have basically these kind of checks and balances in place to make sure that, hey, people aren't just calling our API and absolutely abusing the amount of candidates that they're pulling from an account or pushing a lot of people into a hiring funnel. That obviously, to your point earlier about production impacts, like that has a big impact on us. So we have limits to be able to see internally in the back end, okay, this person is sending us quite a few calls. What's the use case? And then we have a very easy way to increase that for them, not impact the integration. It's literally a couple seconds that we can then increase those rate limits and keep that integration functioning over time. So it's something that I think has been super helpful for us to, one, cut down on any sort of abuse of the API, but then two, still be flexible and nimble to be able to say, hey, we need to kind of take the governor off and let this partner really run with the integration, because there is a valid use case for it and we want the customer experience to be great, certainly.
Yeah, and when you have those boundaries, right, then you guys can monitor that. It's not a surprise. Makes life a little bit easier. Shon, you have thoughts?
Oh man, I think the biggest thing that happens when doing an integration strategy is the people who are doing the integration strategy aren't talking to the core team. And so you'll have a really successful integration, and all of a sudden now your API as the core team is like being really abused in your mind, but like now it's being used. This is actually a great thing for your company. And so just making sure you talk to them. And this is just echoing what Trevor said about rate limits and like making sure that you're just working with your team. You have to think about your APIs when you're building your integrations, and sometimes that can be an afterthought.
Yeah, what do you think, Venkat?
So absolutely what Trevor and Shon is saying is my first thought as well, right? A flexible architecture, a comprehensive ability to kind of look at proactively, able to identify some of these things, right? And, as the APIs are getting abused, or if it is like something which is going to get trodden down very quickly. Few other areas that we can potentially think is almost like having areas around data management strategies, making sure from a version control, making sure setting the standards around the data that is going to get passing through this pipe very frequently, right? Making sure some of this integration related stuff are portable enough, because you may want to test it out, or you may want to throttle it down to a different integration altogether. So ability to have that portability as well.
Yeah, and I'll add on again from the battle scars, especially for companies that are really starting this for the first time. Like, follow just normal engineering best practices. Like, we don't need to get cute and like make up your own auth or try to like build some wacky way that records interact with each other. There's very well documented, very well adopted protocols around some of these things. Shon is actually speaking at API World next week about auth, but we've seen some pretty crazy stuff that also didn't have in mind that lots and lots of companies were going to be using these concurrently. And there's just, every time data makes a hop between systems, there's an opportunity for failure. So that resiliency is really important. And there is one way to, you can make your API so secure that no one can get in because they can't figure out how. And I think that kind of defeats the purpose of having a partner program. Now, we actually got 2 questions that I think are relevant for this conversation. So somebody said, you guys mentioned something about complexity. Can you share experience about integration infrastructure a little deeper down? I'm going to let someone who's not Shon go first, because that's like our whole business.
This is top of mind for me, just given some recent work that we've been doing with a payroll integration, where this is probably the most complex that we've done, where there's dozens and dozens of APIs depending what you want to do specifically. And if you want to do anything outside of that, you need authorization to get access to that API. And oftentimes the build will start. We realize, maybe we want to add this bit of functionality of this feature. We have to go back to their team, ask for clearance, get that enabled on our sandbox and test environment. So it's just this kind of like constant cyclical process. And to the point earlier around maintenance, I mean, even if you want to enhance an integration, then you've got to go back to that partner, get that enabled on the account. Maybe someone's left, maybe it's a new point of contact. You're trying to sift through that. So it's, it definitely can get complex trying to navigate through all that.
Yeah, Venkat, I'm not sure if you have anything to add about the infrastructure side.
So absolutely. I mean, the complexities generally, they tend to have the integration infrastructure, and then you kind of start with 2 or 3 different systems, and then you kind of keep on adding it. It's going to become fragile depending on how you set it up, right? So flexible architecture, like Trevor says, is very critical and having some of those microservices like approach where individual components can scale independently. And it is going to be useful because that way you're not going to create bottlenecks in the system and able to kind of still process it. Trevor used a example of payroll and the employee HR system. Now you extend it beyond that to kind of, either a CRM ERP kind of situation, or CRM ERP and an inventory situation, so on and so forth. It's going to get complex, right? Ability to kind of have that ability to configure, customize, and put additional business logic without having to change the entire code is going to be very important.
And Shon, I know you have thoughts. No Pandium commercial, but
yeah, I think it's fundamentally, we've been saying it over. You got to sort of over and over during this call. We got to treat these integrations as almost the same way you would treat a product feature, and put it into the same processes that you would, and the same tests that you would do of whether something is valuable or not. What are the benefits or the costs, and you got to do all that up front. Speaking to like Trevor, the scope creep that you get when you're like, hey, turns out I can use this too. Like, it would have been nicer to have thought about that earlier. But at the same time, and I was thinking of this earlier, we're all probably Scrum based. We're all working on agile processes. Don't get stuff out fast and then see what the customers are saying. Sometimes you don't need those extra widgets until someone asks for them, right? It goes beyond that coolness. So it just goes back to treat it like a product, do your normal product stuff.
Yeah, and I'll say too, what we see a lot with companies when they're starting to think about scale, or like they have enough customers where they are expecting that to happen, is over time, to Sean's point, these integrations have been treated as like sort of an operational thing that's required, but not given like first class status. And companies have them running on 5 different iPaaS tools, on a Raspberry Pi under some intern's desk, like in a Python notebook somewhere. They're just all over the place. There's no consistency. And if one of these apps takes off, nobody at the company knows really what it does or where it lives or how to work on it. So I think creating a centralized place and process for these things, just like you would do for your core code base, will save you a lot of headaches in the long run. Because once folks start to adopt tools, it's very difficult to migrate and make changes underneath them. I've also seen companies have like 7 different versions of a QuickBooks integration. Like that's probably not super easy to manage. And we actually have another question from the audience. I'm sorry, the person asked a few things. Would be curious to hear your perspective on direct integrations versus middleware, and when it's better to use one or the other. I'm not going to let Sean answer this one because we have thoughts.
This is a timely question because it's something that I think has come up a lot internally for us. And tying back to that flexibility piece, when I first joined, it was kind of native or the highway. We're not going to do anything outside of that. We're not going to have partners build integrations into us outside of that. It was like a very rigid model. And we started to see, hey, more and more people want that level of flexibility. We shouldn't exclude them from our partner ecosystem. Ultimately, at the end of the day, we want to be able to market to customers, hey, we have an integration with this solution. And frankly, if it's through a native integration or if it's through an iPaaS or a unified API, as long as the data can be passed and it worked, cool. Like that's what we care about mostly. So we adjusted just our approach with our partnerships program in line with that to be a bit more flexible there. And I see it too with a lot of conversations I have with partners where it's almost like a stepping stone, a third-party tool where it's like, hey, let's just see if there's people using this integration. Like maybe we've done our research, we've done our homework. It looks like there's a good opportunity here, but let's actually see if people are using integration. So they'll use that. And then, a couple of years down the road, say, hey, it makes sense to do native integration. We have the resources to maintain it. We can go down it because it is, to Venkat's earlier point around, you can't just build an integration and then you're done. The maintenance piece is key. So if you're going to commit to it, you got to have the resources to keep it running.
Absolutely, Trevor. Right? Not only just maintenance, but basically as businesses change, they should be able to add some additional board logic to it. You can go ahead and, if you have all the resources in the entire world, you can build everything by yourself. But why would you do that? The normal things that you focus on your business and then kind of let the best of breed item kind of take over some of these key complexities for you. Not only just able to kind of continue with the configurations areas, but also able to expand with the business. That's my point of view, Christian.
Sean?
I can't say it any better than Trevor. And it's I would just say you focus on your APIs and you let other people build those integrations. Your product is the value you're providing, and what you're doing with the data is the value you're providing. There's no real need to focus on this. What's another tool, that basically everyone else is doing too. So I know I'm going to say go for the iPaaS, of course, but I would also say why not both? And this is the whole ecology aspect. We support any type of integration model. You have partners coming in, we'll help you with that. You have native integrations, that's there. You have to build all of these things in order to be good.
And there's also like a billion different tools now, right? Like we're not still in 2002 where you had Informatica and Baby MuleSoft at that point, but there was just a handful of those really clunky tools for like Toyota to use for their warehouses and stuff. There's so many options depending on your level of complexity. I think, to y'all's point, like ownership, Trevor, I think you said, like, who's going to actually maintain ownership of this over time? How important is it to your business? All can feed in. And I think I've said this a lot of times, and much to my sadness, I don't think there is a silver bullet that's going to hit like every use case. The software world is just too diverse. But, I think it's good to assess different tools for the job. And that actually feeds into some questions about prioritization. I know, Trevor, you alluded to that. It sounds like you're doing a lot of that. What factors do you guys use at work to determine if an integration is prioritized, when it's prioritized? Like, what are the driving factors?
I can take that. And for all the product people in general, right? It's a careful balance of strategic impact, something that is feasible, and at the same time having a long-term value, right? For us, or for me and my team, generally what we try to do is integrations that support direct critical business functions, whether it is a revenue generation, customer experience, or increasing operational efficiency. Those generally take some precedence over something else. Scalability, reusability becomes another piece. You can actually think about a single integration that solves multiple different departments, right? A integration between, let's say, CRM and ERP can help finance, sales, customer service, that usually will. Then, like I said, technical feasibility as a resource, all of us have that problem, right? So making sure from our expertise what can be done at the right times, that also becomes a prioritization factor. Last is anything that is compliance, data security, and things like that should play. That would be my guideline in terms of prioritization.
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head. We think about it too in the sense of it's, hey, does this unlock basically a new feature set that we don't offer natively ourselves? Maybe more kind of unique to some industries other than others, where, for example, like if you're an assessment tool, you'll need to have integrations with an applicant tracking system. But then by that same vein, you could look at the ATS as like a distribution channel where, hey, if someone's using this ATS, we can then sell into it. They'll then buy more of our assessments through it. So there's certainly a commercial lens to it as well. And just given kind of how much I touch the commercial aspects of our business, it's something that I'm always thinking about is, how can we just get our company and our software out there into the market? Do we need to integrate with a big player that's going to unlock a much larger serviceable addressable market for us? Is it something that we're getting a lot of requests for? We can get a lot of requests for something, but if the market's small, then you have to quantify, okay, like what's the risk to reward? How many actual deals are we seeing that are coming in that we're losing, we're winning because of an integration? So I think it'll also be no surprise too, but it comes down to the data and what that whole opportunity looks like in going down and building an integration. And you can oftentimes try to get the partner to build to you, but you're held to their sort of roadmap, their timelines. Whereas if you're taking it on yourself, you can kind of dictate and control that, but there's responsibility that comes with that and the maintenance too.
I'm curious how you guys actually like tactically do those assessments. Like you guys are on different teams at different companies, obviously, but is it a situation where you get requests from like CX or sales and then someone goes out and like a PM goes out and does that assessment? Or how do you guys think about it? It's different, in our experience everywhere, but I'm curious.
Yeah, so we use a tool called Savio to collect a lot of that feedback from commercial teams. An AE or AM will track it in there. We'll then take a look, okay, how many people are requesting this? Here's, say, the top 5 integration requests we're getting. I'll reach out to them. We'll have a conversation. Hey, how do you typically integrate with solutions like Workable? What could that look like? What's the build process look like? What's the timeline look like? And 2, like, what's their architecture? There have been situations where an integration looked like it made sense, but they were an on-premise solution. We're cloud-based. It just fundamentally, from a company alignment perspective, meant it was going to be very difficult to integrate and to partner with them. So being able to also kind of go through and see, okay, the numbers make sense. This is going to unblock, such and such size of the ecosystem. Let's really put resources in. But until you have that first conversation with the partner and start actually vetting things out of what's possible, how is their solution set up? How does it complement yours? You really don't have all the big picture until you have those conversations. So communication is, I think, one of the most important things too with a would-be partner, to make sure that you are kind of checking your boxes, crossing your T's, dotting your I's, and getting into what you think you're getting into. And you're not kind of shooting for the moon and going to end up in a very different direction.
Yeah, go ahead, Venkat.
Yeah, I cannot more. I'm in full agreement with Trevor, right? Having third-party systems, just because the ecosystems are going to be so different than ours, and you control what is going to be in part of your pieces, right? If an external API provider or the third-party systems are going to change their APIs, how do we kind of monitor some of those things are going to be another important piece, while getting the feedback on new features needed or new capabilities needed is going to be another important piece. We generally use a different a set of criterion on how we prioritize it. But it comes down to those four things which I was studying: business impact, feasibility, and a few other things.
Shon, anything to add there?
Just in full agreement. It's basic prioritization exercise. What are your users using? How much money is it going to bring in?
All
And
right,
can
we
we
just
do
have
it?
about. Sorry.
And can we do it, right?
And can we do it? I mean, you can always do it if the money's enough, right? I guess.
That's very true. That's very true.
Man, Trevor, you just gave me some PTSD talking about on-prem too.
You'd be surprised how many tools are still on-prem.
I
still out there.
am quoted as saying many times that like those enterprise tools are not going away until those servers like catch fire.
Yeah.
If it works and it's running, I don't blame them. Go ahead, Venkat.
Absolutely. I mean, on-prem systems that are sitting there for 20, 30 years, it's working, so no one wants to fiddle around with anything there. But absolutely, integrations of the on-prem versus the cloud we can have a full webinar on that one.
Let's not. I could tell some tales of spending late nights with Windows admins trying to get into Windows servers and stuff. But we'll save that for another time. Okay, we just got like 7 minutes left. So we'll do some final questions here. This is a good one. What's one lesson you've learned from scaling integrations that you wish you had known earlier?
I mean, I don't think this is going to be earth-shattering, but just taking more of a lean startup methodology to your integrations as well, getting an understanding of, okay, what do we need as a baseline for this integration that people want? And then let's get that out. Because there have been oftentimes folks that I've spoken to just in my network where they think, okay, this needs to be like a bidirectional sync API base. But in reality, the customer just wants to export the CSV file from one system to the next. And that totally checks the box and probably could have saved this person I know a lot of development time, but they didn't have a sound understanding of what the customer actually wanted. So in tying back to the point I made earlier around like, okay, you're looking at how many people have requested the integration, you're talking to the partner, then get an understanding of what do people actually want through the integration. Does it need to be overly simple or does it need to be complex? And just kind of finding a right balance of what you need. And you can always kind of grow from there too.
I couldn't agree more. Start small, start simple is definitely one of the ways. But we as integration platform providers or infrastructure providers, right? For us, the way to look at it is flexibility of the platform, right? There are going to be use cases where it is just an export of a CSV versus, and what Trevor mentioned is also important. Asking the next question, saying, what are you going to do with that CSV? That'll give you insights for some of those things that the customer is not talking about it right now, the user is not talking about right now. But we as an infrastructure provider, we having that flexible architecture, whether it's API microservices based, but also think about the data management, right? Whether it is the CSV is going to get downloaded, does it need to have some security and other governance processes, monitoring and other parts of it, right? My other piece, although you said only one lesson, the second lesson is some of the complex integrations will require just beyond more than just data sync, right? Moving data, it might be whether it's a multi-step, multi-system kind of situation, managing the metadata and establishing some of the state machines, whether it's a process-driven application and process-driven integrations. So that's my two parts here, Cristina.
Shon, what's your one lesson? Just one.
Yeah, no, there's so many. I'm going to go from the strategic that you guys covered so well to something very tactical as an engineering engineer, as an integration engineer. Just hit the API when you first get that ticket or that epic for the first time. Just like that should be the first thing you focus on, because it's usually one of the first things that will stop you for weeks if you can't have access to the actual end system. And it allows you to start testing some of the assumptions that were made during the business and use case decisions that maybe weren't actually informed with any engineering insight. Like APIs can look very different than what's communicated and what's thought about. So yeah, my big thing is just hit that API, make sure you're seeing the things that are talked about in a very broad strokes. Use something like curl or Postman.
That's a good one. And yeah, I totally agree with you, Shon. Don't let that ticket sit there, because if you don't have access to the system, you're going to be in trouble when you try to start. And also what you said, Trevor, I think is really valuable to like treat these in a really like iterative way and get that MVP out that does like just the, maybe not the bare minimum, but you know, it needs to function, but make some decisions about how you want it to function as the person that is the expert on your own system. And go ahead and push that out. Because I've seen a lot of companies that want to have this sort of like waterfall style scoping document in advance, and they're sending out surveys to their customers. How do you use Intuit and like all this stuff? And you end up with this huge list of different conflicting use cases. And in reality, if you just said, hey, we're going to sync these transactions over as either invoices or estimates, folks would probably be fine with that. So I always err on the side of telling folks, just get it in the hands of your users. They will definitely tell you if it's not working, and it's most likely additive, right? Like you can't do that if you're replacing a current integration with a new one. That's not good, but you're giving them something that they've been asking for. And folks are typically not shy about providing the feedback, especially if they're non-technical users, right? Like they'll tell you. And all right, I think we have time for one more question here from the audience. Here is a good one to round it out. If you guys are starting to scale, or the folks on the team or on the call are starting to scale, what is a good indicator that your company should be looking at revamping either their like API process, their current APIs, or the integration process and infrastructure that they currently are using? Like, where do you see that inflection point?
I can go. As the company grows, right, it probably falls under the prioritization area, where if it is going to be a business-driven decision and business different areas, that can be the first one. Changing the API-related infrastructure is definitely going to be one of the players in that ability at the runtime. But having capability for training, observability, and things like that is going to be another important piece, because you may start off with testing with, like what Shon initially said, 100,000 data pieces, but we kind of have it in flux with like millions of records. You would need that health check, able to monitor real-time changes.
And is it costing the business money? I mean, if you're losing deals by not having integrations, it's usually a good indicator that it's time to make some changes there.
Anything to add, Shon?
I think it's really about, again, the front end. And so the money, like, are you losing those deals? Are you unable to keep your customers? Is it taking too long to get through your sales process because you don't have these integrations? Like, if you're at that point, like, that's a great time to like, let's focus on this.
Yeah. And I would say too, if you as a business decide that this is a path you want to go down, look at your previous history of building integrations in-house and the estimated, level of effort, whether it's a t-shirt size or wall clock time, and then what actually ended up happening and your half of that. And like, hey, what actually ended up being some of the stumbling blocks? Because if you want to 10x or 100x or 1000x that, those things are only going to be compounded. Well, I think we are at time. Really appreciate all of you guys joining us and having this conversation. I could talk about this literally forever. If folks are interested in learning more APIs, partnerships, integrations, you can check us out at pandium.com. You can also check out our YouTube channel, which you can get to from there. And if you ever just want to trade stories about connecting to an AS400 system at midnight, like, I'm here for you. Shon might not be, but I'm here for you. Thanks, everybody.
Awesome. Thanks so much.